Where the land slows the heart. Evelyn had never traveled to a place like this before. She stepped out of the small creaking bus that had carried her through winding roads and endless stretches of green fields, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The village she had arrived at was small, almost hidden from the rest of the world, tucked between gentle hills and wide open spaces that seemed to stretch forever. The air was different here, fresh and heavy with the smell of soil and grass, and it seemed to move slower, as if it were taking its time to reach her lungs. Every breath felt new, every sound sharper, the distant crow of a rooster, the gentle babble of a nearby stream, and the whisper of wind brushing against tall, swaying trees. She carried only a small suitcase, filled with a few things she had decided were essential for this journey, and a heart full of uncertainty. After the sudden death of her parents, Evelyn had been sent to this quiet village to live with her uncle, whom she had not seen in years. The city she had grown up in was a place of constant movement, buses honking, people rushing, lights flashing, but here nothing seemed to hurry. Everything existed in its own time, and at first she didn't know how to fit in. The village streets were lined with small weathered houses made of wood and stone. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, and the occasional dog barked far away, carrying its sound across the open land. There was a rhythm here, Evelyn realized, a quiet heartbeat that pulsed through every tree, every field, and every winding path. It was a rhythm she had forgotten, buried beneath the noise of her city life. Her uncle's house appeared at the end of a narrow dirt lane, surrounded by a small garden and an old wooden fence that leaned slightly in one corner. The house had the kind of presence that spoke of long years, of lives lived slowly and carefully. Evelyn paused before the gate, unsure whether to step inside. She remembered her parents' hurried lives, their constant plans, and their endless worries, and the stillness of this place felt almost foreign. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked up to the door, taking note of the tiny cracks in the paint and the soft creak of the wooden steps under her feet. Then she knocked. The sound seemed loud in the quiet, echoing across the empty lane. A few moments later, the door opened, revealing her uncle. He was an older man, tall and thin, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold the calm of someone who had lived many years without letting life rush him. "Evelyn," he said, his voice gentle and warm, "welcome home." She hesitated for a second before stepping inside, noticing how the house smelled of herbs and wood smoke. It felt cozy, lived in, and somehow familiar, even though she had never spent much time here before. Her uncle led her through the house, showing her the small kitchen with its old stove, the living room with a fireplace that had clearly not been used in weeks, and finally, her bedroom. The room was simple, a small bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the garden, but Evelyn felt a sense of calm she hadn't expected. After settling in, she stepped outside again, wandering slowly through the garden. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows and turning the sky into a soft mixture of pink and gold. She ran her fingers over the leaves of the plants her uncle had tended for years, noticing how strong and alive they felt. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply watch the world around her. There was a pond nearby, its surface smooth and reflective, mirroring the colors of the sky. Birds returned to their nests, and the distant hills turned into silhouettes against the fading light. Evelyn felt a strange sense of peace, even though the city still lingered in her thoughts. The busy streets, the people always moving, the endless noise. Here, everything slowed down, everything seemed to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered if maybe that was exactly what she needed. The first few days were not easy. Simple tasks that she had never needed to think about before now filled her days. She learned to carry water from the well, a task that left her arms aching at first. She swept the floors with a broom that seemed too big for her hands and helped her uncle chop wood for the fireplace. Every action required patience, and every day seemed longer because she was unaccustomed to the slower pace. At times, she felt frustrated. She missed the city, its energy, and the sense of constant accomplishment. She missed knowing exactly what her day would bring, the predictable rhythm of her old life. But slowly, as she repeated each task, she began to notice things she had never seen before. The way the morning sunlight caught the dew on the grass, the sound of crickets at night, and the way the wind carried stories from one hill to another. The land seemed alive, and with each passing day, Evelyn felt herself noticing more and more of its subtle beauty. She also began meeting the villagers, though at first they kept their distance. Most of them had lived in the village all their lives, their hands worn from work, their faces lined with stories she could only imagine. A few curious children peered at her from behind fences, shy but interested in the newcomer. One elderly woman, Mrs. Callahan, finally approached her with a basket of freshly baked bread. "You must be tired, dear," she said, her voice soft and caring. Evelyn felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks as she accepted the bread. Small gestures like this began to break down the walls between her and the village. It was clear that they were cautious, not unkind, and she realized that in time they might become friends. But for now, she felt the weight of being an outsider. The quiet observation of people who had learned to measure trust carefully, like the land itself taking its own time to reveal its secrets. Nights were the hardest at first. In the city, Evelyn had been surrounded by light and sound even in her sleep. Here, the darkness seemed complete, the silence profound. At first she tossed and turned, listening to the unfamiliar calls of night animals and the whisper of the wind through the trees. But slowly, she began to notice the patterns in the night. The moon rose steadily over the hills, casting silver light over the fields. Owls hooted softly, and the stars appeared in numbers she had never imagined. The nights, like the days, moved slowly, and in their rhythm she felt the beginnings of something she had almost forgotten: patience. She began to understand that life didn't always need to rush, that not every moment had to be filled with activity. Sometimes the simple act of sitting quietly and observing the world was enough. By the end of the first week, Evelyn felt a tentative connection to the land around her. She walked along the dirt paths that led to the river, listening to the water as it flowed gently past stones and reeds. She watched farmers tending to their fields, noticing how careful and deliberate their movements were, how they seemed to work in harmony with the land rather than against it. There was a lesson in every gesture, in every slowed moment, that she had never learned in the city. And though she still missed the familiar energy of her old life, she felt a small spark of curiosity. What it would mean to live differently, to let the land guide her heart instead of letting her busy mind lead the way.
Evelyn also began to notice changes within herself.
Her thoughts, which once raced constantly, now had space to settle. She began writing in a small journal she carried with her, capturing not just events, but feelings she hadn't paid attention to before. She wrote about the smell of rain on dry soil, the way sunlight painted golden streaks across the hills, and the quiet kindness of her uncle as he taught her the simplest tasks. Each entry felt like a small conversation with the land itself, and she began to understand that perhaps she had come here not just to care for her uncle, but to find a part of herself that had been lost. By the end of her first month, the village no longer felt entirely foreign. The streets she once walked with uncertainty now felt familiar. The faces of neighbors became friendly rather than cautious, and the rhythms of the land started to feel like home. Evelyn realized that she had arrived at this place carrying grief, confusion, and a restless heart. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the land was teaching her something important: that there is value in slowing down, in noticing, and in simply being present. And in that quiet, patient rhythm, she began to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could belong here too. Evelyn's days in the village slowly began to take shape. She had learned the rhythm of the mornings, the soft lights spilling over the hills, the cool air brushing her face, and the gentle sounds of the earth waking up. Each morning she rose early, her uncle already awake and tending to the garden or feeding the chickens. She had once thought these tasks mundane, but now she found a strange satisfaction in them. She learned to scoop water from the well without spilling it, to measure feed for the chickens with careful precision, and to notice the small details: a leaf turning brown, a hen's peculiar cluck, or the way the sunlight hit the barn at a certain hour. At first her hands were clumsy, and her movements slow, but with each passing day she began to feel more capable. Every small success felt like a quiet victory, and the satisfaction it brought was different from anything she had known in the city. It was slower, softer, but more enduring. She also began to notice the village itself in ways she never had before. The streets, once empty and unfamiliar, now had faces she recognized. Farmers with calloused hands waved to her from the fields. Children playing with wooden toys smiled and ran past her, and even the quiet older women who had seemed distant at first now nodded politely when she passed. One neighbor, Thomas, caught her attention more than anyone else. He was a young man, perhaps a few years older than Evelyn, with steady hands and a calm demeanor. He was known in the village for his skill with the fields and his willingness to help anyone in need. Their first conversation was simple, about the weather and the crops, but there was a warmth in his voice that put her at ease. He did not rush her, and he did not judge her city ways. For the first time, Evelyn felt a connection to another person that was patient and natural. As the days passed, Evelyn's curiosity about the land deepened. She began walking through the fields, observing the patterns in the soil, the growth of the plants, and the delicate balance between the farmers and the earth. Her uncle taught her how to tend to the vegetables, how to pull weeds without harming the roots, and how to care for the soil so that it would remain fertile for seasons to come. Each lesson required patience. There were no shortcuts here, no fast results, and Evelyn struggled to let go of her desire for immediate outcomes. But the land had a way of teaching her that some things could not be hurried. Growth, whether of plants or people, took time. Slowly, she began to understand that the land's patience was a lesson in itself, a reminder that her own heart could slow down, that she could learn to observe rather than just act.
Evelyn's evenings became a time for reflection.
After a long day of work in the garden or helping her uncle, she would sit on the porch, her hands still smelling faintly of soil, and watch the sun sink behind the hills. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, casting long shadows across the fields. The world seemed to breathe with her, and she felt her heart begin to settle into the slower rhythm of life here. Sometimes Thomas would join her, bringing a basket of freshly picked vegetables or sharing stories of his family and the village's history. He spoke with a quiet wisdom, pointing out how the seasons had changed over the years, how certain crops thrived or failed, depending on the land's mood, and how every villager had a story tied to the earth. Evelyn listened intently, fascinated by the depth of knowledge that had been cultivated over generations. She realized that her city life, full of gadgets and schedules, had never allowed her to see the beauty of such simple, essential wisdom. Yet despite the growing connection she felt to the land and the villagers, Evelyn struggled with moments of doubt. She missed the energy of the city, the familiar sounds and routines that had once defined her life. Some days she would wake feeling restless, longing for the fast pace she had left behind, but these feelings were often replaced by moments of clarity. She began noticing the subtle changes in the environment, how the morning mist clung to the fields, how the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and how the river sparkled differently depending on the time of day. The village had a rhythm that demanded patience and attention, and as she adjusted, she found herself appreciating things she had never even noticed before. Even the quiet, which had once felt overwhelming, now felt comforting. It allowed her thoughts to settle, her emotions to untangle, and her heart to breathe. One morning, Evelyn decided to accompany Thomas to the river. The path was narrow and winding, with wildflowers brushing against their legs and the sun filtering through the leaves. Thomas showed her how to fish using simple rods, how to tie a knot carefully, and how to read the water's movement to know where the fish might be. Evelyn struggled at first, her fingers fumbling with the lines, but Thomas encouraged her patiently, never rushing, never mocking. When she finally caught her first fish, a small but lively one, she felt a surge of pride. It was not just the act of catching the fish that made her happy. It was the realization that she could learn, that she could adapt, and that the land had given her a gift in its own time. They cooked the fish together over a small fire by the river, and Evelyn marveled at how satisfying such simple food could be when it was prepared with care and shared with someone who understood the rhythms of life. Her uncle noticed these changes too. He commented one evening as they sat by the fire, "You've learned to see the land, Evelyn. That is the first step to understanding it." Evelyn nodded, realizing that she had indeed changed. The hurried thoughts and restless energy that had followed her from the city were no longer as strong. She had begun to move with the land rather than against it, and the peace it brought her was unlike anything she had experienced before. She still had much to learn, but for the first time she felt that the slow pace of the village was not a limitation, but a gift. The villagers also began to accept her more fully. They noticed her willingness to help, her curiosity about their traditions, and the respect she showed for the land and its ways. Mrs. Bay asks. Callahan invited her to help bake bread, teaching her how to knead dough just right and to sense when it was ready to rise. Farmers allowed her to help plant seeds and harvest crops, explaining the importance of each step in a way that made her appreciate the effort behind every meal. Even the children began following her around, eager to learn from her, and Evelyn found herself laughing more often, her city-hardened heart softening with each new connection. She realized that her presence here, once met with suspicion, had slowly begun to feel natural. She was becoming a part of this community, not by rushing to fit in, but by moving at the same pace as the land and its people. Through it all, Evelyn learned an important lesson. Life did not always need to be hurried. She learned that being present in the moment, observing and listening, was just as important as action. She discovered that patience was not passive, but active, requiring attention, effort, and care. Each task she performed, each interaction she had, was a step toward understanding the deeper rhythm of life that the village had preserved for generations. And with every passing day, her heart, which had once raced with anxiety and grief, began to slow. It beat in time with the wind, the river, and the rustling leaves, carrying a quiet contentment she had never known. By the end of the second month, Evelyn could no longer imagine leaving. The village, which had once felt foreign and intimidating, had become a place of comfort and learning. The land had become her teacher, the villagers her companions, and her uncle a guide in both life and wisdom. She realized that this slow, patient life was not a punishment or a burden, but a chance to discover herself anew. She understood that sometimes the heart needed to slow down in order to truly feel, to connect, and to grow. And as she stood on the small hill overlooking the fields at sunset, feeling the gentle wind against her face, she knew that she had begun to find what she had been searching for all along: peace, understanding, and a place where her heart could finally rest. Evelyn had begun to feel that the village was no longer a temporary stop in her life, but a place where she could truly belong. The mornings, which had once felt strange and challenging, now came with a quiet comfort. She had settled into her routines, tending to the garden with her uncle, feeding the chickens, and helping with chores that required patience and care. But it was not just the work that began to shape her days. It was the people she was starting to know and the stories she was hearing from them. One morning, Thomas invited her to help with repairing the old barn at the edge of his family's property. It was a structure that had weathered decades of storms, with wooden beams that creaked under pressure. Evelyn had never done anything like this before. She carried tools with awkward hands, measured boards with care, and learned how to hammer nails so they would hold without splitting the wood. At first, she was clumsy, missing the mark more than once, but Thomas never rushed her or criticized her mistakes. He simply showed her the technique again, explaining each step in a calm, deliberate voice. Through his patience, Evelyn learned a valuable lesson. Some things, whether building a barn or learning to live in a new place, could not be hurried. They required attention, presence, and care. As they worked, Thomas shared stories of the village, tales of people and events that had shaped it over decades. He spoke of harvests that had failed during harsh winters, of children who had grown up chasing fireflies in the summer nights, and of elders who had once walked the same paths Evelyn now followed. Each story was filled with small details: the scent of the fields, the sound of rain against the rooftops, the laughter of families that made the village come alive. Evelyn listened, captivated, realizing that these stories were not just entertainment, but lessons in history, resilience, and connection. The land had memories, and the people had preserved them in their words, their work, and their quiet routines. Evelyn also spent time with her uncle, who shared stories of her parents' childhood. She learned that her father had loved to run along the riverbanks, racing the wind and laughing as if the world could never catch him. Her mother had spent hours in the garden, learning to plant vegetables and care for the soil, much like Evelyn was now doing. These stories made Evelyn feel closer to her parents, even though they were no longer alive. She realized that the land held their memories as well, and by walking the same paths, tending the same soil, and observing the same sunsets, she could feel a connection that went beyond words. The sense of continuity comforted her, helping her accept her grief without letting it overwhelm her. The days were filled with small, meaningful interactions that gradually made her feel like a part of the community. She helped Mrs. Callahan bake bread, learning the precise movements needed to knead dough just enough for it to rise perfectly. She joined neighbors to collect eggs, noticing the unique patterns and colors of each one. She even participated in mending fences, laughing as she struggled with stubborn posts and loose wires. Every action, no matter how small, made her feel more capable and more connected. She began to understand that life here was not about rushing or achieving big milestones quickly. It was about being present in the moment, noticing details and caring for the people and the land around her. Evelyn also formed a deeper bond with Thomas during their walks through the surrounding fields and forests. They explored hidden trails, discovered small streams, and watched deer grazing quietly in the distance. Thomas pointed out plants with medicinal uses, taught her how to read animal tracks, and showed her which trees were best for climbing or resting under. Their conversations ranged from practical lessons to personal reflections. Evelyn found herself sharing thoughts she had never voiced before, about her fears, her memories of the city, and her hopes for the future. Thomas listened without judgment, offering gentle encouragement and the occasional quiet joke that made her laugh. In his presence, Evelyn realized that friendship could be both strong and calm, rooted in understanding rather than in excitement or distraction. Evenings became a special time for Evelyn. After a day filled with work, learning, and exploration, she would sit by the river or on the small hill behind her uncle's house, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the hills. The colors of the sky shifted gradually, from warm pinks and oranges to deep purples and blues, while the first stars began to appear. She began to notice subtle patterns, how the birds returned to their nests in flocks, how the fireflies lit up small patches of grass, and how the moon rose to watch over the land with a steady, calming presence. These moments of quiet reflection became essential to her, teaching her to slow her thoughts and appreciate the simple beauty of life. It was in these quiet evenings that Evelyn felt most connected to the village, the land, and herself. Evelyn's understanding of patience deepened further when she helped with the planting of the new crops. Her uncle explained how timing was essential, how the seeds needed to be planted in just the right conditions, and how nature's rhythm could not be hurried. Evelyn watched the farmers work, noticing their careful, deliberate movements, their attention to each seed and furrow. She realized that the land had its own pace, and to work with it meant to respect it. Her hands grew calloused, her arms strong, but the satisfaction of completing each row of plants, seeing them neatly lined and ready to grow, was unmatched. It was a lesson that extended beyond farming. Evelyn understood that life, too, required patience and care to flourish. The village itself began to feel like a living storybook, each person, house, and path holding a tale. Evelyn spent time learning from the elders, who taught her songs, proverbs, and practical skills. One elderly man showed her how to make simple tools from wood, explaining how each design had been perfected over generations. An older woman taught her to preserve fruits and vegetables, turning ordinary foods into something that could last through the winter. Each lesson reminded Evelyn that knowledge was not just in books or schools. It was in the land, in the people, and in the acts of daily life. She began to see herself not as a visitor, but as a participant in a community that had learned to thrive by moving slowly and paying attention. Evelyn also discovered small joys she had never experienced before. She found pleasure in simple walks to the river at dawn, watching the mist rise from the water. She delighted in spotting rabbits hopping between bushes or listening to frogs croak by the pond. She learned to make small herbal remedies for minor ailments, guided by Thomas and the elders, and felt proud when they helped her uncle or neighbors. She began sketching the scenery in a notebook she carried, drawing the hills, the trees, the houses, and sometimes the villagers themselves. Each sketch was a reminder that life could be slow and simple, and still be full of meaning. The village celebrated a small harvest festival that month, and Evelyn participated for the first time. She helped prepare food, decorate the communal area, and learn the traditional dances. She watched families laugh together, children chase one another, and neighbors exchange stories by the fireside. For the first time, Evelyn felt fully included in something larger than herself. She realized that her presence in the village mattered, not because of what she had achieved, but because she had shown care, attention, and respect for the people and the land. In that moment, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known in the city where life had always been busy, impersonal, and fleeting. Through these experiences, Evelyn's heart continued to slow. The restlessness and anxiety that had followed her from the city no longer dominated her thoughts. She learned to sit quietly, to listen, and to observe the small rhythms of life. She discovered that connection, whether to people, the land, or oneself, required patience, empathy, and attention. And in return, it offered a sense of fulfillment and joy that nothing in the fast-paced city had ever provided. The land, the villagers, and the simple acts of living were teaching her lessons that were both profound and gentle. By the end of this period, Evelyn felt that she had grown in ways she could not have imagined. She had learned skills that were new and challenging, formed relationships that were meaningful and grounding, and discovered a part of herself that thrived in patience and care. The village had become more than a refuge. It had become a place where she could learn, grow, and truly be herself. She understood that life here moved slowly not because it lacked purpose, but because it allowed each moment to be fully experienced. And as she walked home one evening, the sun casting golden light over the fields, she smiled quietly to herself, knowing that her heart had begun to find its own rhythm, one that matched the pace of the land she had come to love. Evelyn had grown comfortable with the rhythms of the village, with the slow mornings, quiet afternoons, and peaceful evenings. She had learned to work with the land, to care for the animals, and to connect with the villagers. She had begun to feel that she belonged here, that this place was becoming a home in every sense. But life in the village, as she was about to discover, was not always calm or easy. Nature, as beautiful and life-giving as it was, could also be unpredictable, demanding, and unforgiving. It began with the weather. For weeks, the skies had been gray, heavy clouds rolling over the hills, and the air growing thick with moisture. At first, it was just a few heavy rains, which made the soil damp and the air smell of earth. The villagers spoke of the rain as both a blessing and a warning. "Too much at once can hurt the crops," Thomas told Evelyn as they walked through the fields. "We rely on the land, but the land has its moods." Evelyn watched as farmers worked quickly to protect their harvests, carrying tarps, reinforcing fences, and tending to vulnerable plants. The calm, measured rhythm of the village had shifted. Now, there was a tension in the air, a quiet worry that everyone felt but did not often voice. One evening, as Evelyn helped her uncle bring in firewood, the first signs of trouble became clear. The river near the village had begun to swell, moving faster and higher than she had ever seen it. Its gentle murmur had transformed into a low roar, carrying fallen branches and debris downstream. Thomas arrived shortly after, running along the dirt path from the fields. "It's coming faster than expected," he said, his face serious but calm. "We need to prepare the houses and animals before it reaches the village." Evelyn felt a pang of fear, but also a strange determination. She had come to the village to learn patience, to live with care and attention, and now she realized that her presence could help in ways she had not imagined. Over the next several hours, the villagers worked together, moving animals to higher ground, securing barns, and reinforcing small levees along the riverbank. Evelyn found herself carrying hay, moving tools, and helping where she could. She felt her muscles ache, her hands blister, and her heart race, but she also felt a deep sense of purpose. She was no longer an outsider watching from a distance. She was part of this community, and her efforts mattered. Every villager worked with focus and care, each task done slowly but intentionally, making the most of the time they had before the water might reach their homes. The storm arrived that night, heavier and more persistent than anyone had expected. Rain fell in sheets, drumming on rooftops, while wind bent the trees and rattled windows. Lightning flashed over the hills, briefly illuminating the swollen river and the fields that now shimmered with water. Evelyn stayed awake, sitting beside her uncle by the fireplace, listening to the sound of the storm outside. She could hear Thomas moving through the village, checking on neighbors, lending hands wherever needed. There was a strange rhythm to it, a mix of fear and determination, and Evelyn felt her heart move in time with the others, tense but steady. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a village that was both battered and resilient. Fields were flooded in some areas, fences had collapsed, and some houses had leaks that would need immediate repair. But no lives had been lost, and the community had come together in a way that filled Evelyn with admiration. Thomas helped her uncle assess the damage to their property, showing her which parts of the garden were salvageable and which crops would need replanting. Evelyn felt sadness at the sight of ruined plants, but she also understood the lesson the land was giving her. Life could be unpredictable, but strength and perseverance could help endure even the most difficult challenges. Over the next few days, Evelyn threw herself into the work of recovery. She helped rebuild fences, patch roofs, and clear debris from the fields. The villagers worked side by side, their collective effort creating a sense of shared purpose and resilience. Evelyn felt her connection to the land and the community deepen even further. She realized that patience was not just about quiet mornings and reflective evenings. It was also about enduring hardships, working with others, and facing challenges with calm determination. She began to notice small acts of care around her, neighbors sharing tools, children helping carry firewood, and elders giving advice without ever raising their voices.
It was a lesson in cooperation and humility, one that she would carry with her for the rest of her life.
During this period, Evelyn also discovered her own strength. She found that she could carry heavy loads without complaint, navigate muddy paths with careful balance, and comfort others who were feeling overwhelmed. There was a moment when she helped rescue a frightened goat from the edge of the swollen riverbank, carefully coaxing it to safety while Thomas and 2 other villagers watched. The goat's legs trembled and its eyes were wide with fear, but Evelyn stayed calm, speaking softly and moving slowly. When the animal finally stepped onto solid ground, she felt a surge of pride and relief. It was a small victory, but it was meaningful. She had contributed in a tangible way, and the villagers looked at her with quiet respect and gratitude. As the days passed, the village began to heal. Crops were replanted, fences were rebuilt, and homes were patched. The river returned to its usual calm, and the sun shone warmly over the fields once more. Evelyn, exhausted but content, walked along the same paths she had wandered weeks before, noticing the resilience of the land. New shoots of green were emerging from the soil and the trees seemed to stand taller after the storm. She realized that challenges, while difficult, also revealed the strength and character of the land and the people who lived there. She felt a new sense of appreciation for the slow, steady life she had embraced, understanding that it allowed her to face difficulties with clarity and patience. The experience also brought Evelyn and Thomas closer. During the recovery work, they often shared quiet conversations about life, nature, and the future. Thomas spoke about his family's history, about generations who had endured similar hardships and had always found a way to keep the village alive. Evelyn shared her own thoughts and fears, feeling that Thomas understood her in a way few people ever had. Their friendship deepened, built on shared effort, trust, and the recognition that life's challenges could be met more easily together. Evelyn began to see that relationships, like the land, required attention, care, and patience. They were strengthened not only by joy, but also by adversity. Evelyn's uncle watched her closely during this time, noting the change in his niece. He saw her growing stronger, more confident, and more in tune with the rhythms of the village. One evening, he took her aside and said, "You've learned a lot, Evelyn, not just about the land, but about yourself. Life will always bring storms, but you've learned to face them with courage and care." Evelyn nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She understood that the land, the villagers, and even the storm itself had all been teachers, guiding her toward resilience and understanding. She felt a deep gratitude for the experience, even though it had been difficult and exhausting. The storm and its aftermath also strengthened the sense of community in the village. Evelyn noticed how neighbors helped one another without hesitation, sharing food, tools, and labor. She realized that life in the village was not just about surviving individually. It was about supporting one another, building connections, and creating a network of care. She felt proud to be a part of that network, to contribute her strength, patience, and attention to the well-being of the land and its people. She began to see herself not as a newcomer learning from the village, but as an active participant in its life and growth. By the end of this challenging period, Evelyn felt transformed. The experience had tested her patience, strength, and resilience, but it had also shown her what she was capable of. She had learned to trust herself, to trust others, and to respect the land in both its calm and its fury. She had discovered that life's challenges were not obstacles to avoid, but opportunities to grow and connect more deeply with the world around her. As she stood on the hill overlooking the fields one evening, the sun casting golden light over the village, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that she had never known before. She understood that life, like the land, had its rhythms, times of calm, times of work, and times of challenge. But all of it was meaningful, and all of it was worth experiencing fully. Evelyn had arrived in the village searching for solace and belonging, and through the storm and its aftermath she had found both. She had discovered her own strength, deepened her relationships, and learned to move in harmony with the land. The village, with its slow pace, attentive people, and enduring spirit, had taught her that life's greatest lessons were often learned in the quiet moments, in the steady work, and in facing challenges with courage and care. And as she walked through the fields, feeling the soft earth under her feet and the wind in her hair, she knew that she had grown not just stronger, but wiser, more patient, and more connected to the world around her. The seasons had begun to change in the village. The sweltering heat of summer gave way to cooler, golden days of early autumn. Evelyn walked through the fields she had come to know so well, noticing subtle changes in the land. The grass had turned to soft amber, leaves fluttered gently from the trees, and the air carried the crisp scent of earth preparing for rest. She felt a calm that had once been foreign to her, a peace that came not from stillness alone, but from knowing she had grown alongside this land, its people, and the rhythm of life it nurtured. Everything here moved slowly, carefully, intentionally, and in that deliberate pace Evelyn felt her heart finally align with the world around her. She rose early as always, tending to the garden with her uncle and helping feed the chickens. But now her movements were confident and steady. She no longer fumbled with tools or spilled water from the well. She had learned to work with patience, to respect the land's rhythm, and to notice the smallest details, the veins of a leaf, the pattern of soil cracks, the way the sunlight danced across the fence posts. Each task, no matter how simple, carried meaning. Evelyn realized that life in the village had taught her that every moment, every action, had value if done with attention and care. Her hands bore the marks of labor, and her heart bore the mark of understanding. Both told her she belonged here, fully, not as a visitor but as part of the land and the people who nurtured it. Her relationship with the villagers had deepened as well. They now welcomed her warmly, trusting her with responsibilities and including her in traditions. Evelyn helped Mrs. Callahan prepare preserves for the winter, learning the delicate timing needed to ensure each jar was perfect. She joined neighbors in mending fences, not just for her uncle's property, but for the village as a whole, her efforts now respected and appreciated. She noticed how children ran toward her, seeking guidance or simply companionship, and how the elders smiled knowingly when she asked thoughtful questions. Evelyn understood that connection required consistency, attention, and humility, and in giving her time and care, she had earned a place in this community. It was no longer a question of fitting in. She belonged naturally, fully, and gratefully. Thomas continued to be a companion and guide, though their friendship had evolved into something deeper, quiet, and understanding. Together they explored the outskirts of the village, finding hidden streams and forest paths, watching deer graze and foxes sneak quietly along the edges of the fields. Thomas taught her to notice the small things, how the wind carried different scents at different times of the day, how the clouds shaped shadows on the hills, and how the birds' songs shifted with the seasons. Evelyn shared her thoughts too, speaking of her dreams, her memories of the city, and the moments that had frightened or inspired her. In his presence she felt safe to be fully herself, and she realized that relationships, like the land, needed time, patience, and care to grow. She began to understand that life was richest when shared with others, when attention was given, and when love and respect were present in every gesture. The harvest season arrived, and with it came a sense of accomplishment and celebration. The crops they had planted months ago now yielded their fruits, and the villagers worked together to gather, store, and prepare for the winter. Evelyn moved confidently among them, helping wherever she could. She carried baskets of produce, shared in the laughter of children, and joined in the songs that echoed across the fields as people worked together. Every moment was filled with a sense of purpose and community. Evelyn felt pride not only in what she had helped create, but in the way the village worked as a family, each person contributing their effort, patience, and care for the collective good. The land had grown alongside them, a reminder that nurturing and attention could bring life and beauty, even after hardships. Evelyn's uncle watched her quietly, pride shining in his eyes. He noticed how she had transformed, not just physically, through labor, but emotionally and spiritually. She had learned patience, resilience, and empathy, and she now understood the value of living with attention and care. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have grown," he said simply. "You've learned to listen to the land and to your heart. That is the greatest gift of all." Evelyn smiled, feeling the weight of those words settle within her. She realized that this journey had been about more than surviving the city, enduring her grief, or learning chores. It had been about discovering herself, about finding peace, patience, and belonging in a place that moved at its own deliberate rhythm. Nights had become Evelyn's favorite part of each day. She often sat on the porch, looking out at the fields under the soft glow of moonlight. The stars twinkled in endless numbers and the river reflected their light as it moved gently past the village. The quiet of the night was no longer intimidating. It was comforting. Evelyn had learned to breathe with it, to let her thoughts settle and her heart slow. The rhythm of the village had become the rhythm of her life. She thought about her parents and the life she had left behind in the city. There was sadness still, but it was gentle, no longer sharp or restless. Here she had found a way to carry their memory with peace, letting her grief become part of her understanding rather than an obstacle to living. Evelyn also began reflecting on how far she had come. She remembered her first days, the awkwardness, the fear, the uncertainty, and compared them to now when she could tend the garden, help with the animals, participate in the harvest, and offer guidance to children. She realized that growth had come not from rushing or forcing herself, but from patient attention, steady effort, and openness to learning. The land had taught her that life was not a race, that strength was built over time, and that true connection required presence, patience, and care. She understood that she had changed in ways that went far beyond skills or daily routines. She had learned how to live fully, attentively, and meaningfully. One afternoon, Thomas invited her to walk to a small hill that overlooked the village. From there they could see the patchwork of fields, the winding paths, the houses tucked among trees, and the distant hills that framed their world. Evelyn looked out at the landscape, taking in the beauty and tranquility of it all. "It's peaceful," she said softly. Thomas nodded. "It teaches you how to slow down," he replied. "But it also teaches you how to notice, how to care, and how to grow." Evelyn smiled, realizing that he was speaking not only about the land but about her own journey. She felt gratitude for the experiences she had faced, the work, the challenges, the friendships, and even the storm that had tested her. Each had shaped her, guiding her to a deeper understanding of herself and her place in the world. The village, with its slow rhythms and enduring spirit, had given her something she had never known in the city, a sense of true belonging. She had learned to trust in the flow of life, to act with patience, and to connect deeply with both people and nature. Every task, every relationship, and every quiet moment of reflection had built a foundation of understanding, resilience, and gratitude. Evelyn understood that the land, like the heart, required attention and care. When nurtured patiently, it would respond with beauty, sustenance, and harmony. As autumn deepened, Evelyn spent more time teaching and sharing what she had learned. She showed children how to plant seeds, explained to newcomers the rhythms of the garden, and helped organize small projects that benefited the entire village. Her confidence and knowledge had grown, and she took joy in passing on lessons, just as Thomas and the elders had taught her. She realized that belonging was not only about receiving guidance but also about giving it, about contributing to the life of the community, and about helping others discover the rhythm of life that she had come to love. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Evelyn sat quietly on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and violet. The fields stretched endlessly, golden in the late light, and the village moved slowly, deliberately in harmony with the land. She thought of how far she had come, from a restless city girl, anxious and uncertain, to someone who now moved with patience, awareness, and care. She realized that the land had done more than slow her heart. It had healed it, nurtured it, and taught it how to live fully. She felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet joy that came not from excitement or noise but from the knowledge that she had grown, belonged, and found a rhythm that would guide her for the rest of her life. As she reflected, Evelyn understood the profound truth of her journey. Life was not about rushing or achieving everything at once. It was about noticing, caring, learning, and connecting. It was about facing challenges with courage, embracing change with patience, and finding meaning in every small, deliberate act. She felt gratitude for the land, for her uncle, for Thomas, and for the villagers who had welcomed her, guided her, and trusted her. Most of all, she felt gratitude for herself, for her willingness to open her heart, slow her pace, and embrace a life that was measured not by speed, but by presence, attention, and love. And so, as night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Evelyn sat quietly, letting the wind carry her thoughts across the fields, letting the river's gentle flow remind her of life's steady rhythm, and letting her heart rest finally in the place where she had learned to live, love, and belong. The land had slowed her heart, but in slowing it, it had given her something far more precious: peace, understanding, and the joy of truly being alive. She had come seeking solace, and she had found a home.